So here we are with the RPG Breakfast Chat. First one for November. Good morning, everybody. So I'm just here. It's just me and the Glenn. You can go and give me your intro and talk about what your latest thing is, and obviously drop any links to the chat. But I feel like we're going to talk a bunch about Mystara, which is good because I'm not very knowledgeable on that setting, so I'd love to hear about it. But go ahead and give me your intro, and then we'll rock and roll.
Okay, I'm Glenn Welch, better known as Mr. Welch for my comedy writings. I'm a theater critic here locally in Houston. I cover mostly community theater. I'm also known for my biographies and my nonfiction writing, again, covering mostly Houston. And that's not really gaming related, though. That's kind of the day job. So what I am known for, at least, is D&D when I'm not making funny talk, is I've been working on converting the Mystara setting to 5th edition. I started that 3 years ago, and I just now finished the first book, though I can't print it yet because Wizards only allow certain settings to be allowed, and apparently they're going with the least fun to the most fun in that order.
I lived in Houston for a long time, though I grew up in New York City. I live in New York City, but it's me, Todd from Hex Press. Glenn, feel free if you have any links. Is Nance still out there in Houston?
Nance is still the museum. Just anything you ever needed to have is at Nance, even if you have to wipe off about an inch of dust.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I've off and on been going to Nance, since I was a kid. And it seems like the people have never changed. It's like the time just sort of stops inside that place.
Well, Hippie Dave died a few years ago.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah, he was old and in poor health.
Oh man, that's a bummer. Okay, I guess things do change. Oh well, rest in peace, Hippie Dave. You'll be missed, or you are missed, I'm sure. So Mystara is obviously, your Twitter handle is Mystara. You're master of Mystara. So, I just never got into a ton of the old settings. I don't know. Me and my friends, we always just ended up homebrewing our stuff away. But I know that Mystara is held in high regard, particularly by people who lived through playing it when it was the official setting. What do you like so much about Mystara? And what are the fun things you like to tell people about it? What's your, what draws you and keeps you into that particular setting?
Oh, first off, it's mostly the historical amalgams where you've got various nations that are based off of real world nations from here. So you've got Mongols and Vikings and Arabs and Romans and Italian, Scots, Greeks, French, Spanish. There's a lot of things. So when you got new players coming in, you can say what nationality you want to play, and this is what you are.
Does it suffer from some of the things? I know that some of the classical racist element or sort of stereotyping in negative ways of some of these peoples, or does it do a pretty good job of showing at least everybody's sort of neutral, kind of balanced representation?
Well, it depends, because there are some of the nationalities which are skewed into ways you don't normally associate with. For example, the French, the Nouveau Varon, is set in Glantry, and their big thing is their leaders are usually quite insane. So, you don't normally associate the French with Gothic horror, but Mystara does. Oh, except for maybe the New Orleans.
Right.
You got with different parts of Italy captured in time in different nations. You've got the backstabbing Romans, you've got the murderous Borgias. It does keep to the stereotype as they're instantly recognizable, but it doesn't have the, it doesn't make it cartoonish.
Gotcha. It doesn't seem to be skewed towards one of these cultures more than another. They all have their quirks and their things associated with them.
Right. You've got the Romanians or the Serbians, and they're very superstitious. The Florentians are obsessed with money. The Polynesians are happy-go-lucky and just carefree.
Very cool. People coming in. It is nice. I think they do that in pretty much every setting, has at least something recognizable. But it's neat that at least it seems like from what you're saying, cover the globe or a lot of it with the different cultures they represent. It's not limited to just Western European tropes.
Yeah. And they go for some of the more obscure ones, which you have to look into, like the Melanesians are on one island, which are a thing. The Asian one is kind of a conglomeration of different Asian nationalities. They don't really have anything African because where they set the African nation was right next to where the city that blew up, their setting Holocaust happened. So everybody there was kind of relocated because of, nuclear Holocaust.
Was it a sci-fi kind of Holocaust, or was it something?
Yeah, it was the basis. The original story from Mystara, at least how they wrote it, because they were trying to get Blackmore into the setting, is you had Blackmore, Temple of the Frog, and they set it thousands of years in Mystara's past. And they assimilated a captured spaceship, or a stranded spaceship, wasn't really captured, into their technology base. So they started making techno magic at an alarming rate, and something went wrong, and the city went supernova.
That would hurt.
And it was a major impact, and they had the radiation from the fallout, which drove out most of the people. And unfortunately, a lot of the nations that were around Blackmore were either exterminated or just completely crippled to the point of they had to be preserved in this kind of magical preserve on Mystara to save their civilization.
Like Polana all fruit, but for nation states.
Right. They hide them in the middle of the world in this hollowed out cavern.
Ah, cool. Well, I always love a good Dyson sphere. Was Greyhawk also merged into Mystara? I again, I'm terrible with the different settings, so I can't remember if they kept it separate or if they also kind of put it into the same world.
No, Greyhawk became the AD&D setting, where Mystara became the Beckme setting, and then they completely diverged from each other after that.
Gotcha.
And then I guess they went with AD&D over regular D&D because that was Gary's baby instead of Frank Mincer's baby.
Plus, they're trying to get away from paying Arneson, right? I mean, it didn't work, but that was part of the original AD&D purpose, if I remember correctly.
Gygax brought Arneson in because he needed allies when TSR was in the middle of their turmoil. And Arneson was there just to right. He knew it. He didn't want to be part of their politics. He didn't really care for anybody. He was just there for the paycheck. And then he saw the writing on the walls longer. And they decided to, instead of having two separate lines, to merge it into second edition. And that's when Mystara flipped to second edition, and that's when the setting died. 81 to 96. It had a 15-year run. That's
a darn good run. Yeah, for sure. Now, was it politics that killed it, or was there something they liked about? I'm trying to think what other settings they had around at the time. I know Hollow Earth, and second edition had a bunch of different settings flourish under that regime, but I don't remember which one was. I could pull out the books, I suppose. I don't remember which one was their main setting.
Yeah, you had Hollow World, Red Steel, the Known World, and then the Blackmore setting, and you also had the Serpent Peninsula, and that really wasn't a very large swath of land. It was killed primarily through politics. A lot of the Gygax loyalists out, and most of them worked on the Mystara setting.
Right. I was trying to think, what's that one where it's got that domain management? I can't remember if that's its own setting or not.
That was the companion setting. Yeah, that was, Mystara was heavily on domain management.
So what's your favorite area of Mystara? Where do you like to have your campaigns? Are you globetrotting? Do you like to stick to a particular region?
Usually I stick to Darrican because it's centrally located, and that's the only really reason, so they can travel to anywhere from that nation.
And what people tell me about Darrican? What's their
Darrican are the money people. It's this massive nation that borders everybody, and they have more land than they have people, so they don't have a very strong military. So they are all about, they border owes them favors and money. So they can't be invaded, because if they do that, everybody that is dependent on their goods will spring to their defense. And that was a large plot point in the Red Arrow Black Shield module, where they were invaded by an evil, the Master of the Desert Nomads, and everybody sprung to their defense. because they need Darrican stuff. Everything has to go through Darrican because most nations don't border each other. They border Darrican first.
So what's the wilderness like in Mystara? Is it pockets? Is there particularly large frontiers like we think of in kind of like Keep on the Borderlands style, where there's sort of the edge of civilization and a vast unknown, or is it kind of pockets within these nation states that are wild and unruly?
The wilderness for Mystara is actually a major part of the setting because most of the nations have an unsettled area, or they just they settle along the rivers and the coasts. So you've got large amounts of wilderness. And the Mystara thing is, again, the domain management. They expect you to go into these wildernesses and carve out parts of the nation, in which point they'll make you a baron or a knight or something. So with very few exceptions, every nation has islands or forests or mountains that have never been explored. And that's left up to the players. Exploration and domain, is probably the most important part of the Mystara setting.
Is that something that you, when you're running Mystara, do you make sure to pitch that to your players up front? Is that, hey, if these are your kind of goals, or this is what the game's structured around?
Right, because it goes into that's one of the most important. The way you set it up is you give them the dungeon crawls, the basic, and that gets them their levels. Then you go to the expert. That's when they start exploring out and seeking out everything. In fact, the one of the best modules in D&D was Night Star Terror, where you start off at basic, where you're going into dungeons, and then you go off and you explore a major part of the Karamikos nation and find a hidden civilization and a lost valley and some hidden horrors. So that kind of takes you from the going around killing goblins all the way up to, wow, this is brand new. Why didn't we know about this before?
Right, that is a very good module. I've read through it a couple times. So it's been ages, so I should probably pull it out again. Is that your favorite of the Mystara? If you were going to pick, like, this is the one, I guess, Mystara module to run, would that be the one for you, or what do you like to run?
Because there's so much going on in that module. It's almost insane. People don't believe you when you say you start off with an ambush, then you go into a siege, then a chase, then you have an urban adventure, then you have to go some more dungeon crawling. Then you go head off into the Lost Valley, where you have to deal with two lost civilizations vying for your support, and you can't trust either of them. Then meanwhile, you're chasing these slavers, trying to stop them from reaching an ancient magic, and that's all one module.
Yeah, it's definitely a big undertaking. I do like when the kind of the older games, the way they sort of moved from you're and going into dark tombs and just scraping your way through to now you're vying for power on a more national or regional scale. I always just, I don't know, maybe it just tickled the kind of bones of the sort of fantasy I like, but I've always appreciated that kind of progression of character goals, that you're not at high level still trying to scrape through tombs anymore. Now you are your own nation, or you're fighting for nations and worlds and all that stuff.
Yeah, and that was some of the later modules, some of the better modules. It took into account that by that time, when you're that high of a level, you're going to be fantastically wealthy. So what was the one that I thrown up? Legacy of Blood. And it gets there, and you're having to turn around a barony, which has gone to pot. And you get there, and you're reading down, they're giving you all the options. And he goes, we know your players are fantastically wealthy at this point. So if they would like to purchase things to make this a little bit easier, here are some things that they can spend money on to make everything.
Nice. Go right for their purse strings. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Get them to spend some of that loot.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, so if you build this bridge, you're gonna make the swamp folk angry, but you're gonna make the farmers happy. If you cut the bridge, or if you cut a dam through this way, you're gonna make the halflings angry, and you'll make the swamp folk angry. You do this and say, now, if you spend a lot more money, you can buy this bridge, which is made by the elves, which won't destroy the swamps, and everybody's happy, but it's going to cost you a lot more money.
Yeah, no, those are great kinds of options, and I like that a lot. So obviously, did you get you came to Mystara when it was new and young into the world, or was it something that you came to later? What was your journey to Mystara like?
Oh, walked into KB Toys and they were half off.
Half off's always good.
Yeah. And walked in, bought about 8 gazetteers, and then walked out because they were blowing them out over. I was actually on vacation.
So when was this? This is during second edition or afterwards when they're just kind of hanging around in the corners?
In the 80s. This is
okay.
A few years before second edition.
Gotcha. Yeah, we used to go to Corpus sometimes in the summers, but I don't think we never stumbled into KB Toys having that kind of sale.
Yeah, and KB Toys bought a bunch of TSR and they were blowing it out at the end. They just bought too much.
Did you take a look at other settings, or you just fell in love with Mystara and never looked back?
I looked at other settings. I mean, before I guess the late 80s, there was only Greyhawk and Mystara. They added Forgotten Realms, I think, in 87. So they by the time Forgotten Realms had been come around, the first 2 settings had already been established. They gave you plain Spelljammer, rather, and that one, everybody is nostalgic for Spelljammer, but it came and died really fast. It had rules issues.
Yeah, I remember having that original box, and it seemed really cool, but it also seemed really complicated, and there were just a lot of. I remember just thinking back to the time. I still remember this stuff. The rules, square foot or tonnage, that would determine how much oxygen you had and how long. And it's just like. I mean, now as an adult, I look back and I go, why are you burdening it with all this stuff? It's just, you're in magic flying ships going off into space. Just hand wave the oxygen consumption. But instead, it's like you're trying to calculate it, like how big is your blast? And creatures of different sizes to consume too much weight, too much crunch, I think, at least for the base version. Maybe you put that in some kind of expert set for people who really want all that. But I think to burden down your kind of base game when you're already juggling tons of stuff, when you try to add that in with the different spheres and going between worlds and all this stuff, to throw that on top of it just seemed like too much.
Listening to the people that were, when I was listening, they were having a conversation with some of the designers for it, and I guess the best way they described it was nice idea, lousy execution.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think it is a really cool, flavorful way of connecting all these different campaign areas, these different realms together, is to say, yeah, you can get on this big flying, Viking ship and launch yourself between them. But you want to make that journey fun. And it seems like, it definitely feels like, looking back at it, that the wrong way to go about that is to try to drown it in mechanics, even if those things are somehow reality based and something that is crazily, not reality at all. It just seems like a weird decision. I'll have to try to go look up and see if I can find that conversation, listen to it, or read it, or watch it, because I'd definitely be interested to know what their thought process was designing it the way that they did.
All right. Shazam!
The Spelljammer fell away. You got Dragonlance. Dragonlance turned into this monster success, which I'm surprised they haven't gone back to Dragonlance in 5th edition, because that was, people talk about the boom of D&D right now, but I still remember Dragonlance being talked about on the evening news about just how much, just how pop and.
Yeah, I just did a read along of Ravenloft, which was something that Tracy Hickman, I guess, did with his wife before he did Dragonlance. I wonder, are there rights issues? Do they have to share the rights with like Weiss and Hickman, or does WotC own Dragonlance outright?
According to all the things I've heard, they own all the rights to everything.
Okay, yeah, I'm definitely, I definitely wonder then why they haven't delved into it. I know that from a module standpoint, like I said, I just did Ravenloft, and I hadn't read through Ravenloft in forever, and it's awfully linear, even though it puts it in sort of an open space. And I know that one of the big beefs with the Dragonlance modules, which I've never played or written or read, rather, that they are extraordinarily linear with kind of forced decision points on you and all kinds of things that I think definitely would be more or less frowned upon in these days. May have seemed to be novel at the time, particularly since I think they tied in more or less with the books. So maybe people didn't mind being forced down particular paths because they were following in the footsteps of the characters they'd read about in the books. But it'd be definitely interesting to see if they took a crack at it now, with the kind of modern sensibilities, and see what came out of it.
See, well, Dragonlance is like the epic Tolkien fantasy, so they follow the story arc, which isn't bad if you like that. And yeah, we're kind of devolving into talking the settings goat. So if you like the Tolkien settings, the Tolkien adventures, we go from the murky woods to the haunted forest to the Lich King's tomb, and say that's Dragonlance. And if that's what you like, that's the setting you want. All the D&D settings, at least the classic ones, the top 10, they all have a different feel, and that's what made the game so great. If you want this, you can go find this setting. Because after that, they turned Ravenloft into its own setting, and it was the horror setting. It was one of the 3 catch-alls. They gave us the wonderful Planescape, which is completely got rid of Spelljammer because Planescape was just a much better executed idea. And then, because of all the politics involved back at TSR, they killed off Greyhawk. They didn't want Gygax to have any more influence. They killed off Mystara because it was done by the people that were close to Gary, and they didn't want that done anymore. So they wanted those gone. So they gave us Birthright, which came out in the TSR Death Spiral, and that's why it's considered, I guess, the least of the 10. And then what was after that? Oh, those were the 10. And then 3rd edition came around. They only brought back, that's when they gave us Eberron. They brought back Greyhawk briefly, but then they went to Forgotten Realms, and they just flooded us with Forgotten Realms. 4th edition, they got rid of everything except for Forgotten Realms. They gave us the N-tier Veil. And now we got 5th edition, which, again, everything is written from Forgotten Realms. And people are sick of Forgotten Realms because it's the only setting. And they're giving you little bites rather than this expansive world that they've written.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting approach how they've changed from sort of the setting box to this kind of campaign by campaign approach. But it's hard to argue with it just as far as, successfully as a product because it's working. But yeah,
it's also working because it's the only thing available.
Right.
I'm pretty sure if they had done Dragonlance instead of Forgotten Realms, we would be having the same conversation about how much we don't like Dragonlance because it's the only option.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think they picked a setting and they ran with it. I suppose there's probably where you hope there's some kind of happy medium between one thing where you're scattering stuff amongst too many settings that you can't really support them all in a good way. And then, yeah, having this where you just have one megalithic setting that you might get sick of because you want a different flavor, and that setting is only of a certain kind of flavor.
Well, familiarity breeds contempt. If it's the only option, you get really sick of it. And they opened up Ravenloft after they basically reskinned the Ravenloft module into Curse of Straw and just added extra parts. And they brought in the Ravnica, which they could have done that with Planescape. Planescape was already a better setting, and it was already done, but they got to bring magic into it. And now all of the stuff that seems to be brought out, that they're bringing out, at least for other stuff, it seems to be the people that get their attention the most. Eberron, Keith Baker, brilliant idea. He wrote his Eberron book, just like I wrote my Mystara book, and he started twitching and podcasting and streaming and all this stuff, and all of a sudden there was all these people watching going, we want to play in that. And Wizards had to see that he had created a large, massive audience for this setting, and so they had to acquiesce and allow Eberron to come out.
And now that gives us a nice segue to, so now you're hoping that you can get a similar thing with the Mystara material that you've created.
Yeah, because people are looking for a new setting. The last Mystara book came out in 96. It's been a while. So for all the grognards out there, this is like, oh, this is nostalgia road. But for everybody who's not a grognard, for the people that got into 5th edition, this is a brand new setting. This is, everything they could possibly want as far as something else that's not Forgotten Realms.
So what would be your pitch to the people who may be not sick, but they've done Forgotten Realms, maybe they're itching for something new, and here you want to bring back this kind of what's old is new again, Mystara. What's your 30-second speech to them?
I was like, this is the known world setting. It is, nations that you already know, but you don't, You haven't seen them before in this way. It's got new magics. It's got new, races, new classes, new everything. It is not Forgotten Realms. It does not have the same monsters and the same creatures. It doesn't even have the same races. If if they want to try something new, if they want to try something fresh, saying something fresh about a module written in 81. But if you want to see a new take on old tales, this is what you want. You want to, if it's not just dungeon exploring, if you want to get involved into the politics of Thyatis with the Roman Senate, there's that. You can go into the Broken Lands where there's no civilization and kick humanoid butt all day. You can ride with the Yalarim across the deserts of Arabia, fight trolls with the Vikings in the northern reaches. Every nation is almost its own mini setting. They're all well written. They're all fleshed out. It's not just like, hey, we go into Cumbria. What's Cumbria like? I don't know. It's just they're fantasy humans. Where if you go into Etrugan, you've got, the people based on the Comanche and the Navajo. If you go over to Glantry, you've got a fantasy Yugoslavia with all these wizards from all different runs of life, and they all hate each other, but they have to work together because they hate everybody else worse. And the big thing is you can impact this world. It's not set in stone. If you go into, the Darrican and you go into the Outer Lands and you carve out a territory, they will make you they will make you lord of the area that you've cleaned out, and then you have to be responsible for it.
I mean, it sounds great. I think that might appeal to. I mean, I think the one thing with Forgotten Realms is it feels. And again, I'm not a huge Forgotten Realms fan. I don't hate it. I don't love it. It feels kind of very generic, high fantasy, high magic fantasy, I guess. Waterdeep is sort of interesting, but a lot of the other places, they just kind of seem like backdrops that don't have a particularly strong character of their own. Definitely feels like when we're saying about Mystara that you have a lot of these different areas, a very strong character that you can really, like you said, you can you don't have to necessarily go across the entire world. You can put yourself in any one of these spots that appeals to you, and it has its own very flavorful area to delve into and really get attached and sort of just get, adventure in and have fun and explore.
And the big thing is over Forgotten Realms is you're not going to run into high level NPCs every single adventure to make cameo appearances because they're busy. They have things to do.
So so I just mentioned, I think of Forgotten Realms as a very high magic sort of campaign. What is Mystara also high magic? How does the levels of magic kind of filter out into Mystara?
Depends heavily on the location that you're in. Yes, there's one thing with Mystara, it's all dependent on the location. If you go to Etrugan, they've got a lot of clerical magic. They got almost no wizard magic. In like Karamikos, which is like fantasy Romania, it's very low magic. The wizards are rare. Clerics are, there, but they're not known for being heavily clerical. You go to Glantry and the magic is off the scale as far as wizards magic go, because it's all about researching and creating new spells. Alphatia is another one that's stupid heavy magic because they've got like floating continents and things like that. But then you go over to Thyatis, which is Byzantine ancient Rome, and again, you go back to low magic settings. The Vikings in the northern reaches, they have a lot of mysterious magics, but they don't, you're not going to see wizards throwing fireballs. You're not going to have clerics raising, the dead en masse. So again, you can go to the areas that and to fit the setting. If you go to Darrican or the Menethad guilds, which are the mercantile nations, they've turned magic into a commercial economic science.
Did they do a good job of I guess what's the word I'm looking for? I guess balancing it so that there's not a disconnect between going from a high magic space to, the question of, well, why don't all the high magic people just obliterate or take over all the low magic people? Do they give some good ways to, make sense of that?
The two high magic areas they gave them a problem with both. One thing, the Glantrians hate each other. They're very insular and they don't work together at all very well. The only reason why they're there is because they needed a place where the wizards wouldn't be persecuted. So they went there and they kicked out all the clerics and started persecuting everyone else that weren't wizards. The Alphatians have this cultural malaise that they're stuck with, where all the wizards are pretty much chaotic neutral. They don't care about anybody else. They want to be left alone. They want to do their research. They can't be bothered to help the nation. So, like when we redid the timeline, when they have the Great War between the empires, most of the Alphatian wizards don't fight because they can't be bothered. It's somebody else's responsibility to provide magical support for their armies. And because of that, their armies are getting slaughtered because the Phaeacians in hand-to-hand combat are far superior.
Well, that's cool. I mean, I like that. So I kind of reminds me a little bit of, I guess, the Stygians in the Conan's universe, where they sort of do their own thing in their dark towers, but they haven't decided for whatever reason to try to really take over the entire world. They just do their thing.
I mean, a major theme of Mystara is a Cold War. You've got the Phaeacians versus the Alphatians, and these are like the monster empires that would squash anyone else. But they're so perfectly balanced that a war would destroy both of them. And everybody else has to live in their shadow. And that's like I said, that's one of the overarching themes. And that's why when they came out with Wrath of the Immortals, when TSR said nuke everything, it really wrecked the setting. So in the Mystara book, we went back to year 1000 and took a different timeline to avoid everything blowing up.
Your own Kelvin timeline, or whatever they called the J.J. Abrams Star Trek alternate spinoff.
Only without turning the setting into sock.
Yes, thank you. I was not a big fan of the Abrams one.
All right. Shazam!
When did you start writing the book? How long is this literary journey of reconstructing Mystara? How long have you been on it?
It was about 3 years ago.
What gave you the idea to start?
Angrily quitting a job that cheated me out of about $20,000.
That would do it.
I write really good angry.
And so obviously you so that job goes poorly. And but I guess of all the things you could have put your writing prowess to, what made you decide to, like, I want to go in and I want to put this Mystara book together?
Wizards said that they were going to be opening it. Well, the guild started, I guess, about 3 years ago, the DM's Guild, where you're allowed to write for Wizards and send it there, but I don't recommend that unless you're writing only in their settings. And they said, hey, we're going to open up everything really soon, really, really soon. So I was like, all right, I'll try to do a quick Mystara conversion. And they said, okay, we're not ready yet, so it's going to be a little bit later. So I kept writing. And hey, we just introduced. Hey, look, we're opening up Ravenloft because we got Curse of Straw. So everything else is going to be really, really soon. So kept writing. Got some artists, paid for artists. Started getting a actual layout program, and Wizards kept going, hey, soon, really soon. It's like months became years, became now down the way. Said, guys, I'm already in this, in for a penny, in for a pound, so I might as well finish this.
Absolutely. Now, on the off chance or some chance that Wizards decides, like, we're just not touching Mystara for whatever reason, do you think it'd be, obviously going through and having to rename it, are you going to stick, would you plan to tweak it enough to make it your own total setting, or what's your backup plan if Wizards just decides for whatever dumb reason, not to pull the trigger on it?
Oh, I file off the serial numbers and make it generic and then go to a Kickstarter, because you're not allowed to kickstart anything for the guild. You have to self-finance only.
Yeah, I feel like it would be cool at some point. Maybe I can get a hold of some guild people who write specifically for the guild on here to talk about it, because I definitely think it's an interesting animal. I don't quite understand it from a creator standpoint. I do at a certain point if you're not, you're planning to do it kind of as just a side little thing, but maybe not if it's going to be something your main publication, I guess, stream, just because you kind of lose the rights to everything and they take a lot. If it is popular, obviously people get paid and they're making money, but I think that a Wizard, between Drive-Thru and Wizards, they take a big chunk out of it. And again, they own it. So you can't really build on it.
That's why you do not put anything except for Wizard IP in the guild. If you make, Fantasy Stabby Land and it's your baby and you put it on the guild or Drive-Thru RPG, it becomes theirs. And they make all the decisions. So yeah, don't do that. But if you're making a Ravenloft module or a Dragonlance module or a Birthright module, you can't legally publish it anywhere else. So you might as well throw it into the guild. They pay 50% royalties, which is a lot for as a professional writer, I would say.
I mean, I guess it's down from whatever 90, whatever it would be. I forget what Drive-Thru's cut is if you just publish on there normally, but just the difference between if you were to make, let's say, a generic horror fantasy, sort of module and say, wink, wink, by the way, you could put it in your favorite, gothic horror fantasy setting, then you get, however, minus Drive-Thru's just digital publishing cut, you get all of it as yours. Whereas, yeah, if you actually call it Ravenloft, then you have to put in and you drop down to 50. I'm just looking at like that way. But yeah, 50% is not bad as far as that goes. I just find it curious because I would think that, you want to have ownership of your best ideas and your best work,
right,
and you kind of give that away to be in there in that umbrella. But so I like I said, I'd like to talk to some creators who've taken that road down the line because I do think it's interesting, and I'd be curious to hear how it's worked for them and everything else.
I'd have to find there's a lawyer that did a video on YouTube about the dangers of the posting it up, and yeah, he was scathing on how much control you give them. And said if you're publishing in the IP, then yes, they have the right to restrict where it can be published. But if you're not, this is the 3.0 plague all over again, where everybody's throwing everything they've got in thinking it's a license to make money when it's not, because it's a flooded market. You have to make stuff that's insanely good to get noticed now.
Right. And then not only that, but the next guy can come and just build off what you're doing. And you don't really, I mean, they can credit you and they can credit you in the work, but you don't get anything out of it. They were able to just build off it because you've thrown your stuff back into the pool for wizards to use or anybody else. I mean, and not that that's bad from a just, hey, everyone should be making free and open source content kind of thing, but just seems like to put your best ideas out there and give up so much just to get it onto the guild. It's to me, it feels like a bit of a devil's bargain, but I definitely would like to talk to people who have been in it.
A wise man once said, if you're good at something, never do it for free.
Wise or crazy or both, but yes, very true. Regardless.
And that was this thing. Is like, so I was going to turn into Mystara. I mean, I was actually recently going through all the D&D settings, making an amalgam monster of the best rules from each to try to make, D&D, the combined the Voltron D&D, because that was one thing. Hold on, just like, what's my dog doing? That was the one thing that I've noticed. It's like, I've looked at 5th edition. It's got some great ideas and it's got some bad ideas. And I looked at 3rd edition, had some great ideas, had some bad ideas, and so on and so on. I think we'll take the best from each one and see if you can make them fit. Frankenstein, the whole thing. And, that would be something, once I match all 6 numbers and buy a controlling share in Hasbro and I can recreate that. That's something I would look at.
Oh yeah, that stuff's great.
That was the one thing that was talking about with the friends is like, well, one problem with 5th edition is fighters are boring. You have the attack. That is your only option. I attack.
I mean, I guess there's a whole other conversation like that way, because I don't know that fighters are, I mean, obviously compared to everyone else is given these kind of very thematic powers, and fighters don't really have that besides their kind of stances and whatnot. But I mean, fighters have always been reliant on the sort of fictional positioning of their few abilities as opposed to having a ton of different abilities. I mean, I guess, 3.x, you had like the bash and you had the power attack, but in practice, it was having played with guys who would min-max the heck out of their fighters. It just went from being I attack every round to I power attack every round, or I trip attack every round. It wasn't like they had suddenly this overwhelming number of different options.
Well, I mean, but if you look back, even to Blackmore or 2nd edition skills and powers, they've always had that. It's just we didn't remember it very well. You had multiple attacks, multiple maneuvers. 3.0 turned them into feats, but we've always had these options for the fighters to attack with. The 5th edition, gave the power attack, the trip, the sunder, the bull rush, the expertise attack, where you take a penalty to parry and stuff. And if you look at the rules cyclopedia, you had the bash, the smash, or the smash attack, you had the disarm, and so forth. And because that was, there's a complaint about balance in 5th edition. because it's geared towards low level play more than anything else.
Yeah, I always feel like the thing that with fighters, like I'm mostly my kind of OSR game of choice is basic expert, and there you get a few different things. You get the charges there, and you can do that sort of power attack type move, but you just have a couple of things. I always feel like what happens, or at least what I see a lot when I'm listening to people's games or watching people's games, is just that there isn't a ton of that tactical fictional positioning for fighters. They just kind of step up, and then the enemy fighter type steps up, and then they just kind of bash at each other until somebody goes down, which doesn't leave a lot of room for the more interesting maneuvers fictionally for fighters because they just don't need them.
Well, because then you end up with just World War I battleships going at it.
Right. They just go broadsides and just boom, boom, boom until somebody drops.
You can easily come up with a mechanical limitation for why they can't use all their maneuvers all the time. And you can hand wave it. You can say, like, all right, so the first time you can use your disarm attack, there's no penalty. The second time you have to you attack with disadvantage because they know what to look for now. And then you can't use it after that because you've already shown that trick to the bad guys.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of things that could be done. I do kind of wish that people would play more with the sort of fictional positioning elements of things, but it seems like it's just a different kind of game now. There's the way people like to play, and I think some of the things that the fighters are good at, I feel like they're kind of like your blue collar ham and egger types, and everything seems to be moving in being very flamboyant, which makes the vanilla fighter seem particularly, I guess, boring. But until you absolutely need them to be saving you from something that's trying to bite your head off, in which case that boring becomes necessary and good. But it can be a hard sell for certain types. But I feel like we got sidetracked a little bit.
All right. Shazam!
What were we talking about before we jumped on the fighters?
We're always talking about the history of the setting.
Oh, right. Yeah. So sorry. So go back if you can.
Okay.
Pick up your thread.
My plan to get the book out is I'm following in Keith Baker's footsteps, where he got Twitch streaming and he got reviews and he's got YouTube, all of that, and it became popular. It became it's like it became Wizards of the Coast is obsessed with celebrity promotion of their products. And I mean, I can't deny it, like celebrities, especially since we're the fad right now. We've got, Joe Manganiello talking Dungeons and Dragons for 15 minutes with Stephen Colbert on The Tonight Show. Gary Gygax would have killed for that level of publicity.
Oh yeah, no, definitely for sure. It's amazing how mainstream it's gotten.
Yeah, and so you get this. I mean, the book I've shown it off before. And I've put it in people's hands and I've gotten reviews on it. And it's just all the reviews are rave. And I'm starting to go up the ladder on the reviews and the people that do their own channels. And they're starting to get the buzz about it. Wizards they're never going to do anything with Mystara. They have no intention. They just view it as just a cheap Greyhawk clone, which it's really not. They're two different creatures. And, but it's like if I make it look like the new hot hip setting that people want to play in, that's the key. Or at least that's what everybody that watched the Eberron rise to fame, where he clawed his way back into 5th edition. That's how he did it. They gave us Ghost of Saltmarsh, which had one of the settings was originally Mystara, and it was one of the adventures, and they were supposed to open up Greyhawk with that, but they never did. But the DM's Guild has posted up as available settings for the DM's Guild, Greyhawk and Dragonlance. You can't post anything in there yet, but they've got the rooms for it.
Really? I had no idea they'd opened up those two. I wonder if there's I'm sure I'm curious if some of the people who are still playing in Greyhawk or really have love for the system will go and populate stuff, or does it not let you submit anything to it yet? They just have
not yet. They have, if you go into the Dungeon Masters Guild, you type in available and you type in just DM titles or DM's Guild titles. And then it gives you a list of all the available titles, and it's all the ones that we know: Forgotten Realms, Eberron, Ravnica, and Ravenloft, and all of that. But then you have at the bottom Greyhawk and Dragonlance, and you can click on them. There's nothing in there, but they're there. So there's a guy by the name that calls himself the Greyhawk Grognard. He's got a book just like this ready to go, and he's waiting for Greyhawk to be opened up.
He's got that button. He's got his mouse button hovering over the submit. Just
yeah.
Wait for them to, I'm it'd be interesting. I'm sure they don't even. I'm curious even to reach out, see who even. I don't even know who is in command of their DM's Guild decisions.
I really don't know. The lady that's in charge of it I've talked to, and she says it's not her job to decide what goes up and what stays.
Yeah, I don't think anyone wants to at least publicly acknowledge that job, because then that would.
Yeah, everybody would go, hey, publish mine.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I like what they've been doing on the digital front with like at least putting out a lot of modules and a lot of the old material up there to give people choices, and they're reasonably inexpensive. And I know that I have an original rules like PS. I didn't need to print that one out, but I know that the versions that people have gotten from the public print on demand from drive-through seem to be good copies. So I am happy about that. So maybe they'll figure something out with these other ones, because they do have a lot of that stuff is drive-through. You can buy the stuff for their first party stuff.
When I started writing this book, initially I got a lot of pushback because they kind of really didn't want to mess with the old masters that came forward saying, hey, we'd be happy to get back into it. And so I started writing it, and I got, Bruce Hurd, which was the the copy editor for Mystara. He really didn't help until he finally came around, when he realized that I wasn't just trying to steal their thunder. And I started talking, when I do the Welcome to Mystara channel, some of the original people that wrote with it started sending me stuff going, it's like, hey, we love what you're doing. Here's some corrections. And then they started, chatting with me on a regular basis. But the one thing, when I got the book into PDF format, it was mostly finished. I was showing it off at a convention, and the old guy comes up to me, and he's like, can I take a look at that? He's like, yeah, sure. And they hand it to him, and he starts giving me criticisms on formatting. He's like, you need to move this up here. You need to drop this down, an inch. You need to change the font from 11 to 12. Technical stuff. And I was like, okay, thank you. And it's like, I'm Glenn. He goes, oh, I'm Frank Mincer. And that was when I got out a pen and paper and asked him to repeat everything he said verbatim.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was all stuff that I should have done. And I didn't know, but it was because I've never done this type of, editing, and he had. So I've gotten the book. He told me I had to change some of the art to make it more uniform, to make it look professional. And the cover has to go because it was done by Rick Hershey, but as a photo bash. And I discovered this Greek artist, Rubus, who's fantastic. And they said, make it art, make it full color art, and make it something that's going to be unique to the setting to capture the feel. Don't make it just another lady fighting a dragon. They've done that to death.
Absolutely. That sounds like really good advice. I mean, the cover is going to be the first thing that people are going to see. So you want it to really pull them in, grab them, and evoke something, different, like you're saying, about the setting, because everybody's seen Ladies and Dragons. That's not any different from the thousands of other titles floating around everywhere.
And that was so we're working on that. I'm waiting for Rubus to finish a contract. He was supposed to have that finished by tomorrow, or yesterday rather, and then pay him a lot more money. But try to keep it cliche. And then I have to censor some of the art because Wizards is in a puritanical phase right now.
I mean, the thing is, I kind of get, I mean, not that I necessarily agree with it, but I kind of get where they're coming from. They're really trying to appeal to everybody on all fronts, so they don't want anything that's going to offend anybody of any, anybody's sensibilities of any particular area. So they definitely want to keep things close like that, which, makes things a little bit less interesting in some senses, but I get it.
Well, like the last Avernus book, where every single woman in the book is either in full plate or neck to ankles, high collar dress, without exception.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely can get a little bit, boring, but I mean, I guess I'd almost say, like, if I had to choose between that or just chainmail bikinis everywhere, at least at this point, I'd probably go for what they're doing. Yeah. But if having some different looks is good in different areas, and if you're writing a desert setting, then you'd want people to be in desert fashion, though that probably would actually be all covered up and not everyone flashing in their midriffs. But depending on where it is, you want it to kind of feel that way. But yeah, I mean, it does make things it could make things a little bit less boring. I think it's just everyone wants to be careful to make sure you're not giving anybody short shrift or objectifying certain peoples. And, I get it. It's probably overall is a good thing, though it can feel constricting when you're coming at it from your angle.
I used a lot of European artists, and when I told them the restrictions, they all laughed at me.
Oh, those Europeans.
Yep, and the South Americans, too. And so, yeah, like the art I just posted up, the top is the cover. That's a Rick Hershey and all photo bash. I think that's Sarah Michelle Gellar and about 4 other actresses playing Morgan Ironwolf. And at the bottom is a Rubus, because the rest of his art is too big to put on here as a file transfer. And, that's what people like. The very fast, the very fluid.
Totally. It looks really chaotic, and you really feel like it's very kinetic, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Seems like very much movement. Seems like everything's just happening right in that instant. Very obviously, for those who are going to be listening to this later or not in there yet, it's got a very much a gladiatorial combat feel. It's very cool. Now, is that supposed to take place in that not quite Roman civilization?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And he snuck in some stuff that I didn't catch until afterwards. Like there's a woman, or there's a lady copping a feel on another lady in the crowd. You have to squint, and there's like 4 pixels of nipple on one of the gladiators.
That's funny. So now that you've got all this, I guess is it totally finished? Are you still in the editing? Are you going through Menser's notes and relaying it out, or where are you in the process?
Already did Menser's notes. I went down, spent a lot of money to print up a proof of concept, and also that found a lot more formatting errors. But I mean, it was move a line up 1 here, move a line down here. The formatting didn't hold on these pages. Technical stuff.
Yeah, I think I saw somebody posted a image. I think of that, or I think maybe it was taken. I don't know. I can't remember if it was just the page or was you holding it, but it ended up on Facebook or Reddit or somewhere when I saw it. People talking about it, but it looked like a really nice big hardcover.
Yes, and no typos. Surprisingly, just like I said, stuff that you're going to find conflicts between my printer and my PDF and their printer. That was it.
Yeah, that's a lot of that stuff that kind of because I've done graphic design work and layout and stuff, and that's always that thing when you have to go through that phase of you think you have this perfect PDF, but then you go to the printers and then you realize that the printer, the printer, the company, and the equipment they use and everything about it needs some tweaking. There's nothing necessarily wrong with your PDF, but it doesn't necessarily work for their setup, so you got to go through and fix all that stuff.
Yeah, and that's not really an error. That's just you gotta get the two to talk to each other perfectly, and it's a part of printing that everybody has to go through, and it's a pain in the ass. But what are you going to do?
Yeah, that's it. That's just part of it. But now you have this really pretty looking physical copy that you can take around with you and show off.
And I'm already starting to work on the Dungeon Master's Guide to Mystara, which I've been taking ideas for what to put in that book.
So now, is the current book just setting material?
It is. Hold on, let me get the back of the book. It is information on the 17 nations that are included, rules for the Radiance, which is like the magical radiation that you can use to power spells. Wouldn't recommend it, but it's possible. It goes into all of the immortals, new subclasses, 5 new player races, all the spells from Monty Cook's contribution to Mystara, more feats and stuff. I deliberately made it much larger than the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide.
Okay, so it is basically the players. It is pretty much all the player side plus the setting stuff.
Yeah.
So what do you intend for the DM's side?
The one thing that, first off, domain management and mass combat. The one thing that people told me is like, go into the cultures and aspects of each of these nations. So if you walk into a bar in each one, this is what the reactions of the people that are going to be. That's the one thing that the TSR did slightly, but Wizards kind of hasn't done that. Is how do you run these nations rather than just giving me a write up? How do you run adventures in these nations? You walk into a tavern in Glantry because they're so paranoid and insular. All the conversation in the room is going to stop, and they're going to whisper about you. In Darrican, you're probably going to be welcomed with open arms, and by the time you get to your table, if you look halfway competent, you're going to have 5 job offers.
Yeah, that stuff is super important. And someone pointed out earlier in the chat that I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory or a theory that maybe Wizards doesn't put out that stuff because they want you to just go from their campaign to their campaign book and not make your own stuff. I don't know. Maybe there is. I'm sure there's probably some people who have thought about that idea. But yeah, it's really helpful, even if you are running a campaign book, to get a lot of that background so that you as a GM can become comfortable enough to really feel like when your players go off the rails, or whether they're just in a situation that the book doesn't cover, or you are doing your own adventure, that you can operate in it and feel comfortable to run it in a way that makes sense and it's going to jive with everything else going on. And, it doesn't just kill the game, or you find yourself stumbling because you don't know what to do.
Yeah, eventually I want to make it so that, given the information that I have provided, anybody can go and make their own adventure in the setting without any problem. Because do that with the way they got Forgotten Realms right now, and then Ravenloft, they only talk about Barovia. So if you wanted to go adventuring in Darkon or any of the other nations, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, having gone through that first Ravenloft book, I have to go through and look at the other Ravenloft modules when they came out. Because I just did a read through of I6 Ravenloft, and there's nothing to that space. I was a little bit, having not read it in any kind of recent memory, I was a little bit disappointed just in the fact that it's, everything is just basically get you to Strahd. There's not a lot of extra flavor there. There's no extra content. It's just, everything in that little town of Barovia is just get to Strahd as quickly as possible, and here's what you need to get there. So I'll definitely be curious to go back and read some of the other, once they started to flesh out into its own setting, to see what they added to kind of give it more stuff, because it's pretty bare in its first incarnation.
Yeah, and that was if you want to write about Mystara, there's no 2 nations that are similar, so you have to include all of them. And there's so much more to do. I think when I was writing down all the proposed books for Mystara that I could even just begin writing, it was over 50. You've got the monster manual with all of its weird stuff. If you want to, do adventures in each of the settings, if you want to go to the Mystara fantasy fairy kingdom, their good kingdom is radically different from the Feywild, mainly because it throws all of the stuff that they wrote about the backgrounds and how the Fey work completely on their ear and put it all on Oberon's shoulders, where he's the 9th dimensional chess master, and he's playing everyone off of each other.
All right. Shazam!
Mystara, people will find surprising, is it's got the second most number of D&D video games outside of the Forgotten Realms. I think it has 6 or 7 video games, including the insanely popular Capcom beat-em-ups, which are only tangentially related.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. They still have a multiplayer. They still like D&D Online, right? That's still a thing.
Yeah, but the Capcom was just a solid beat-them-up.
Oh yeah, I love those. Like even going back to not D&D related, but like Golden Axe and those kind, where you just go and run around, beat stuff. That stuff's great.
And you have after that, you've got a lot of domain building stuff, and then you had something. I think it was the TurboGrafx had the only Hollow World video game, like Warrior of the Red Sun or something like that. So there's a lot of old school Mystara. And once I get that book, I can do the Red Steel source book, the Hollow World source book, the Monster Manual, which I am absolutely dreading because there's like 300 Mystaran monsters.
Yeah, that's a lot. And then you need art for all those, or at least a bunch of them. Yep. So,
and then the biggest complaint I've had is I kept with the exclusionary bits of Mystara where certain races don't exist. You can't play a Dragonborn. Dragonborn are superfluous in Mystara because they already have so many lizardmen races. We don't have Drow. We have Shadow Elves. We don't have Dwergar. We have Mordrigswarg. And that's a big thing that people fight over. He's like, well, I want to play a Drow. I'll come here from another world. It's like, okay, one, that's cliche. And two, why don't you try one of the races that are already here?
I mean, yeah, I think one of my big issues, not issues, but I think the thing is I always find with a lot of players is they come in with their own preconceived notions about the character they're going to run. And then they become upset if the setting or the campaign isn't open to what they're doing, as opposed to, I think I put this on Twitter last week. I said, hey, just why don't you go into a campaign and be open-minded, go into someone's game world and say, instead of saying, I demand to play this, go in and see what's going on. And if that isn't available, just be open about playing something that is there. And maybe you'll find something else that you like. But I think there's a lot of people come into games. I've never really done this, but I've never had these really strong character concepts in my mind that I'm now like, oh, I got to come in and play character X. So I just don't see the kind of joy and things that they see with that. But I always think that, look at the setting that you have and then build your character from there, as opposed to coming with a character and trying to force them into the setting. But that's just me.
And then you have to deal with things like Mystara doesn't do wild magic. So there's no wild magic sorcery in Mystara because the science the magic is so stable, it's almost like a science. In fact, they have secret crafts, which are magics they are beginning to develop. And they're still incredibly dangerous because they don't know how to do it right yet. And the secret crafts of Glantry was a pain in the ass to put into Mystara because you had to do it as a prestige class.
I kind of miss prestige classes. I kind of liked them. I didn't play with them a ton, but I really like the flavor that you would have to sort of qualify and kind of undergo some kind of fictional, I don't know if it's training or just kind of, just whatever it was to kind of get over this hurdle. And then you sort of take these things that you've been working on before and kind of crystallize it into that prestige class kind of notion. I always liked that, at least the way it seemed to me, but it didn't stick as far as, I guess, from third to fourth to fifth. But
yeah. And the problem was in 5th edition, the archetypes have kind of made prestige classes a little superfluous.
That is true. I mean, yeah, I think it's maybe some alt edition. You have maybe because it's almost like you prestige class at 3rd level, right? When you pick that subclass, maybe in some kind of alternate universe, they branch it out in a couple of different ways to maybe give you that like 3rd and then 9th and then, I don't know, 15th or something like that. And give you more of that kind of branching pathing that would be more closer to prestige classes. But I don't know if the flavor and stuff. I mean, you get some people who complain that 5th edition doesn't give you enough options. People who love the kind of 3.x or Pathfinder model. But when I look and I see all the variety of characters that people make with the multi-classing and everything that there is, it seems like you can pretty much make almost all of what you might want with what the tools that 5th edition does give you. Maybe not from maybe you have to be at a certain level to hit there, but that's always been the case with any of these things. You don't get everything at first level. You have to go down these feat chains or whatever to get there. And now it's just done a little bit differently with multi-classing, maybe as opposed to feat chaining.
Yeah, like Matt, they're kind of the archetypes are a little bit like prestige classes, or not, but the kits. But that's not a fair comparison because some of the old kits would be more like the backgrounds of 5th edition, just because 2nd edition kits were just so wildly varying in power.
Yeah, I just got lost in all the kits and I mean, I had some of those handbooks. It just seemed like there was just so much. It just became a little bit, I guess, unwieldy, at least for me, or I could just drown in all the options and things that 2nd edition gave.
I mean, you had everything from Peasant Hero, which I think gave you a +3 to, persuasion checks inside your own little village. And that was your ability, all the way up to the Elven Blade Dancer from the Elf Handbook, which I think they later issued an official apology for because it was just ungodly broken. Actually, they kind of retracted that entire Elf book because that just slipped completely through quality control.
Oh, really? I never heard that. I don't think I got deep enough in there to find it.
The guy that wrote it later acknowledged that he had no idea what he was doing, and they weren't bothering to check him.
Went on later to found D&D Wiki, home of all your unbalanced class and character needs. Yeah, it's the balance thing is definitely interesting. Are you going to be I guess I didn't even ask this. The Mystara stuff you've done so far is mostly character facing, but it has subclasses. Are you building it on the the 5e basic rules OGL chassis, or what system are you constructing this on top?
It's Forgotten Realms, so it has to be 5e. Not Forgotten Realms. It's Mystara, so it's a Wizards IP, so it has to be by their standards.
Oh, for the guild, that's right. Because your first guild, that's right. Okay, yeah. Are you how much are you customizing it for Mystara? How much do they let you custom? I don't even know for the guild they have rules as to how much you can pare down or change before it becomes outside of the norm or too far outside the norm.
The glory of it is most of the restrictions are based on what you can and can't use. I didn't use anything on their list for the naughty list because that's all Forgotten Realm. I don't mention any of the old monsters. I used only stuff from Mystara, from 2nd edition and the Blackmore editions. So I didn't run into the problems you would have if you were writing this in Forgotten Realms or Ravenloft, where certain topics are taboo. As far as creating things, I tried to be as iconoclastic as possible. I just hate stereotypes because they're always the same. So I ended up like the fighters. I ended up with the stealth fighter with the brave archetype, or I did the lightly armored. Not berserker fighter, but a Maori warrior as another fighter type, which fighters are all about stacking on the plate mail and going out and stabbing. And the Toa Makai and the brave are the exact opposite. They don't want to be wearing plate mail. They want to be quick and nimble. And that created a problem with a lot of the playtesters. Well, you need to make them barbarians then, and because they don't. Fighters don't run around in light armor. You have to; those are the barbarians, so these should be barbarians. First off, I'm not going to call the Comanche or the Maori barbarians because one, I know a Maori, and he would put me through a wall. He's a nice guy. He's just the size of a small warehouse.
Oh yeah, I mean, I never liked the barbarian as a class title. It doesn't make sense to me. As a barbarian is what someone from the outside call you because they don't understand you. And they're afraid of you, not something that you would call yourself. My occupation is barbarian. I mean, it sounds goofy as hell. I don't know why they didn't change it before now. I don't know why they haven't changed it, particularly given how much more rightfully so sensitive to some of the stuff that we are, that we have a whole idea of archetype of a class that calls themselves a barbarian. Like, it just makes no sense. So anything to get rid of that, I think, is good.
Mechanically, it's boring. You get angry and then you hit things harder. Barbarian has never been a decent class back to 1st edition when they came up with it. This should have been a background. And if you want to make a rage fighter, make a rage fighter.
Oh yeah, I agree completely. It's just that it's the idea of the Viking berserker that they've just kind of just tried to add more stuff to, and people love the abilities, and I know it's a strong class, and people will get into the optimizations you can run with barbarian, how powerful, blah blah blah. But I mean, at the end of the day, when you drill it down to what is this supposed to be inside the fiction, like how is it supposed to make sense as an old character, I feel like it doesn't make sense at all, and it's totally outmoded. But they've stuck with it for whatever reason.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have one barbarian subclass, which is one more than I have monk subclasses, and that was because I had the idea of a Reaver barbarian who would dope up on combat drugs before going into battle, and then hoping he doesn't take enough damage so that when the combat drugs wear off, they don't kill him.
I like it.
Yeah, that one was mechanically difficult.
Yeah, I had sort of for a kind of OSR BX, I was working on a class that I didn't call the barbarian. I called it was like it was a fighter subtype that was a berserker, and I had it there where it would make to try to. The issue with it was I wanted to make it kind of mechanical. I didn't want a rage mechanic, but I wanted something a little bit similar. So what I ended up with, at least what I have right now, is that they're great rushing. They get bonuses if they charge into combat and fight, but they have to make basically saving throws to extract themselves from melee. So they love to get in it, but once they're in it, it's hard for them to quit, which I think to me made sense as far as that bloodlust takes over, and it's hard to, they may want to intellectually back away, but they got their blood is up, so they have a hard time doing it.
And that was a problem. It was a major problem with fitting the new classes into the old Mystara setting, because Mystara predates most of these new classes. I mean, they do have they do have the monk, so they call it the mystic, which creates its own problems in 5th edition. But then, like the sorcerer in 5th edition isn't much mechanically different than the wizard in 5th edition, and like that was that was a problem, because how do you deal with like what gives you your magic? And we don't have dragons humping everything, and again, wild magic doesn't exist, so we had to come up with new forms of sorcery. And then the warlock, then you had the warlock, which is pretty much just an angsty cleric as far as it works. I mean, okay, I go to a immortal power and I get special magics from him. Okay, so you're just a cleric with more steps,
right? And I think the interesting thing to me with warlocks is that there's this. It says nowhere in the rules or in the it's actually written that patrons should be really demanding, but it seems like the way everyone loves to play warlocks is with these really demanding patrons. I find that very interesting. It seems like GMs just cannot not want to touch the patrons, because some of them even say something. I think it's like, what, the great old one patron. It could be that they don't even know that you're drawing power from them, because they're just so much powerful that they're just dripping magic, and that you just catch some of those droplets and run with it. They're not even aware that you're kind of hitched to them like that. But in the games, everyone seems to run it that patrons have to be very strong and as a part of the game, which is kind of fascinating to me, because in so many other facets of the game, they've removed a lot. Like paladins don't have to be, it's just their own willpower, their own, I don't know, their desires that powers them. Clerics, they even make a point of saying that it doesn't even necessarily have to be a real connection to their god. It could just be that they have the faith itself drives them. But with the patrons, that at least the way it gets played is that the patrons are very present in the characters' lives.
That's the one thing about Mystara is the immortals really can't interfere with the lives of their followers, because they have like this giant peace treaty amongst each other, because they need more mortals to become immortal. And if they start providing everything for their followers, the followers won't try to improve their lot. And the immortals are also very jealous of outside powers. They don't want people to discover that there's actual gods or things that can grant them powers without the immortals. So they try to keep them out as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I've always thought with D&D that I feel like I don't know that I need in setting that many different sorts of magic running around. Like, okay, you got clerics, you got druids, you have wizards, you have warlocks, you have sorcerers. Like, I feel like if I was going to make my own setting and to run a 5th edition game, I would definitely pare at least a couple of those down. I'm fine with having maybe 2 or 3 different kinds of magic, but I don't think I need 5 or whatever there is. It just seems like that's a lot of different magic. But I know that they create everything to be like a giant bucket where everything can live together, and so that they can hit everything on their checklist. But it does seem like you don't need quite that many different sorts of ways to drink from the magic well, so to speak.
One major criticism of 5th edition is everything is magical. There's, aside from, you've got, what are all the classes? You've got fighters and rogue, and what was the other one that was the other non-magical? Everything else is magical. Everything else, and then the monks can be magical too. I mean, yes, the fighters and the rogues have these half, fighter, or the half magic use stuff. But everything can cast spells. And oh my God, there's just so many spellcasters.
Yeah, and everything can kind of be a fighter too, which sort of devalues fighting. When people say, oh, I can make a fighter, but it's not a fighter, it's going to be a rogue that does this, that, and the other. Or I can make a fighter, but it's really a bard. I mean, that really kind of devalues that fighting aspect if everyone else can fight almost as well as you can.
Yeah, and that's a major, like I said, when I was trying to do the brave, and everybody goes, well, why don't you just make them rangers? They're stealth oriented, and they're skill oriented, they're nature oriented. They would make so much better rangers. Like, I can't make an entire race magic users, because that's what I would practically be doing with the brave. If the rangers didn't have their own magic spells and several other things that really hamper them, they would have been great for the light armored stealth ambush fighters, but they're not. They're so restrictive. It's like, okay, well, you can fight with 2 weapons like Aragorn, or you can fight with a bow like Robin Hood. Well, what if I want to fight with a sword and a shield? I'm sorry, your version of a ranger does not work with our version of the game. Please make a ranger that does work with our version of the game.
Yeah, I mean, the way things are constructed does leave you with some odd choices for particular archetypes if you're not happy with what they've given you. Like, I'm sure that someone can say, oh, I'm sure there's some feat or something you can get to, get that shield proficiency, but it would be nice if it was a little bit more, not so specific to allow for some different things. Because, yeah, Rangers seem to be like, you either want animal companions or you want to be Aragorn, but not much outside that.
Yeah, and the bonus action economy is absolutely broken because you have they have so many things that work with the bonus actions that take up your only bonus actions. So you can get all these abilities, but if they all use the bonus action, then you're wasting most of them.
Yeah, I think Jeremy Crawford said, I think it was Jeremy Crawford, might have been someone else who said that was definitely a mistake that they would correct if they ever come out with a 5.1 or whatever, would be to structure some of the core actions for classes so that they didn't rely on bonus actions so that they could free up that economy a bit. Because, yeah, for certain classes, not every class, but for certain classes, there's just too much that class wants to do that all rely on that single bonus action per round.
Yeah. And it's the reason why you're not going to find 2-weapon fighters in any class that has a lot of bonus actions, because you get one free attack, but it's your bonus action. Well, what if I want to use this to have double attack with my dog? Well, you can either attack with that dagger or you can attack with your dog. You can't do both.
Yeah, it seems like they should just run animal companions. Now that they have that, I have to go back and look at it again. But with the essential set, they put in the rules for, I forget what they're calling them, just kind of like your NPC companions, like your hireling type things, a little mini rule set for that. And I feel like they should fold animal companions into there to let them act somewhat autonomously, because it just doesn't make it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense that only you or your animal can do something in a given round. It's like, why? They're independent creatures. Why can't they just?
Unless you give it, the easy fix that somebody told me was, as a bonus action, you give them an order. And unless you give them a bonus action to stop or change that order, they're going to keep going with the previous order. So if you tell your dog to sick that orc, that dog is going to keep going after that orc, whether you, no matter what. If you want him to stop, to change things, you're going to have to give him another order.
I like that a lot, actually. I mean, and that makes sense, too, because you can think of it as in the fiction of the bonus action of you finding your dog in the fray and then having to kind of issue that command, and that kind of takes away from what you're doing. So you have to kind of divert your attention slightly. So that actually is a really easy fix. That makes a lot of sense. I'll have to lock that one away to remember later.
Yeah, it's like if you can't forget to tell your dog to stop running, because he'll keep going until you notice him.
Absolutely. I was just going to throw this in the chat, but if anyone's got questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we can talk about them, answer them as best that we can.
All right. Shazam!
Oh yeah, I wanted to ask more about the DM's guide part of your Mystara project. Obviously, you haven't started writing yet, but what sorts of things? Is it going to be all just mechanical, or is it going to be a mix of the mechanics and somewhat and more the behind the scenes, how to run the setting, or a combination, or what kind of stuff do you think you're going to be filling that guide with?
Well, the first thing that I have to put in there, or else I wouldn't be doing the setting right, is how to run your own domains, and that's going to be 90% crunch, and throw in the mass combat rules, which again, mostly crunch. The how to play in Mystara will be a combination of mostly fluff, but it has some crunch to it, because this is how you play in this setting. This is, if you're going to have them adventuring, this is how you run the NPCs. This is what the NPCs are going to act like. The monsters will probably be kicked to another book. I was going to do a who's who, and I was told, no, do that in the source books. Do that in the individual nation books. So don't do like West End Games was notorious for, with repeating the same information book to book just to pad space. Possibly add in some magic items. Talk about some of the lesser known races. The domain rules, I was looking at back maybe because I did it right, but I may come up with something whole cloth.
Which rule book of the Beckme are they in? So Mass and Danger, just so in case people listen later, Mass and Danger had asked what's going to be the basis for your domain rules, BECME, RC, or 2E, and obviously you were saying BECME.
Yeah. Well, that was in the companion set, and the companion set and the rule encyclopedias, their rules for domain management's almost next to nothing. Again, I'd have to move it, and it's a standalone setting. I've seen people use this for every rule set because you don't need to be. There's no connection to the actual BECME rules or the rule encyclopedia rules and the domain system. It's pretty, unique to any setting.
Is it similar to what they did in Birthright, or did Birthright expand on those, or is it totally different?
Birthright was almost like Populous, the role-playing game.
Okay. I remember Populous. I liked that game back then.
Yeah. And then I may update it to 5th edition to change it to some of the rules like advantage and stuff. But, give it a little bit more expansion on what can happen or what you can do. And the one thing I would like to do is to attach themes to your domain. So if you wanted to make Vegas in, Yalarum, these are the rules for this is what you would happen if you try to make gambling a theme in your domain.
What would happen if you made gambling a theme in your domain?
You generate more money at the risk of increasing the crime rate, and not all of the people around you would appreciate that, especially the religions that don't appreciate gambling.
Do you need a desert or some other location so that you can easily drop bodies in if you're going to do a Vegas type?
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to actually have the mob in there, but it's it would definitely cause problems because people would try to cheat or people would try to muscle in on each other.
Does Mystara have any do they have a thieves guild and whatnot? What's their organized crime system like?
It depends from nation to nation. Some of them are really well written. Some of them are absolute trash. Some of them barely get any mention at all.
I'm always, I guess the thieves guilds, I don't know, it was like Crawford and the Grey Mousers, that would pretty much brought thieves guilds to sort of fantasy lore.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, Blackmore was kind of the early examples of it, but I think there was always something. I mean, Charles Dickens wrote about stuff like that.
Oh yeah, I guess he did. That's kind of true. Yeah, I've just been rereading a lot of those, and the Thieves Guild actually doesn't show up in that many stories, at least the ones I've read so far. So it's kind of interesting how it became so prominent.
But if you look at the module, the Veiled Society, it's one of the biggest influences of that module where you're trying to figure out who's the killer. Of course, they accidentally give away the killer on the back cover, but that was something that we noticed during the playtest.
But who's ever going to read the back cover of a module? Come on, nobody reads those. Yeah, that's pretty funny. Let's see, any other questions? Anyone in the chat got questions? Drop them in. Anything else going on for you besides Mystara, or is it all your attention?
I've got some. Right now it's the fall theater season, so that's everything for me. Writing, I'm being paid to record the Eye of Argent, or the Eye of Argon, which is one of the worst bits of science, or not science, but pure fantasy prose ever written.
And who wrote that? Is that somebody I should know?
No, it's pretty much cinematic trash. Somebody wrote it when he was 17. And it's all the worst elements of fantasy, including the typos.
So it's like Aragon, only different.
Yeah. Oh no. The opening line is like he pulls out his sword and he yells at a guard, "Taste my steed."
Maybe he meant it. Maybe that's a real threat in his world, to taste somebody's steed. That's good. But hey, it's something to do, and I presume it's a paying gig, so that's all good.
Yeah, and it's trying to get Grignir the Barbarian. Trying to do him with a Cajun accent is difficult.
Oh man, this obviously has nothing to do with nothing, but one of the big things that I miss, apart from all my friends who are still in Houston, is there's in New York City not a lot of good, or maybe I might say any good Cajun food, which continually bums me out.
Around here, it's just whatever you can catch and cook. Turn everything into a sausage with rice.
Absolutely. See what else? I'm trying to think of anything else on Mystara that you haven't talked about. You've talked a bunch about it, which I appreciate. Are you going? So your I guess your roadmap. So you've got the sort of player's handbook / setting overview or settings guide, then the GM's guide, then monster manual somewhere that mix. Are you going to go for sort of a gazetteer sort of thing where you're going to take it region by region or nation by nation, or what's your plan?
For space reasons, I was going to be doing the books would be three nations a book where you link them together by a common interest.
That makes sense. So, Mass and Danger wrote, "What are your thoughts on minis at the table?" So, I guess it's as a general gaming question. Are you a mini person, theater of the mind combo?
I've got many. It depends entirely on the game. The more combat heavy ones, then people are going to be using miniatures because spacing is important. It depends on your DM's qualities, their capabilities. Some people need them because they just like props. It's like I've played Theater of the Mind really well. The problem is 3rd edition and especially 4th edition, you had to have miniatures. It was required in the module.
Yes, 4th edition particularly. It was a minis game. I mean, that's all there was to it. I don't think they even really had allowances for playing without minis. I mean, everything was squares and pushing and pulling and moving and where you are in this field or that field. And it just seemed like it was built from the ground up to be a game that you played with minis. I've always been a Theater of the Mind guy myself, but I don't dislike minis. I like them. I mean, I think part of it is that I never had a ton of space to either run a minis game and I never collected minis. So it was just a matter of, we use the tools that we have. So I always did Theater of the Mind, but I enjoy playing with minis. It's nice when you kind of have your personalized mini for your character that you're playing. It's just another point of attachment for that character until theoretically, hopefully they don't die. But yeah, I was like Theater of the Mind myself.
Yeah, I mean, it depends, on what you like. And there's no wrong fun unless there's children involved. And there's a lot of wrong fun.
Yes, indeed. It's just nice. I think people will argue whether you have to have for 5th edition or not, but at least I feel like you can play without them. Though, yeah, there are situations when it's nice to have. But yeah, 4th edition pretty much made it. You had to have minis. And if you had minis, and I played with guys that had just tons and tons of minis and all that, then it was great. I think if you came into 4th edition and you didn't have minis, then obviously you can still play. You can use, quarters, pennies, whatever. You can, use any kind of little doodads you have around, tokens to mark yourself. But having some sort of tabletop space was required. Let's see. Andrew says, yeah, 4th pretty much hard required minis. Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
It was a board game.
Yeah, it definitely was an interesting experiment. I think that, the 4th edition's legacy, and by the way, I've said this a lot, I think the 5th edition stealth throws in a lot of 4th edition into the mix. It just does it in a way that's not as disruptive to people's ideas of D&D as I think 4th edition was. I think if they'd released 4th edition as like a board game engine, as you just mentioned, or in some other way that it was an entire experience, I think it would be remembered quite differently, because I think you look at stuff like Gloomhaven and it's essentially 4th edition with some tweaks to it. I mean, their engine isn't exactly the same as 4th edition, but they're basically doing what 4th edition did. And people love Gloomhaven. And I think if they, maybe if they were a little bit ahead of their time with 4th edition and kind of the board gaming, hobby, but in other circumstances, people would probably look a lot more kindly on 4th edition than they did.
And there's bits and pieces of 5th edition that are still very video game expired, like the Neverwinter Nights, hit rest, heal completely.
Yeah, I mean, they I don't know if it's, because I used to think that 4th edition was very much video game inspired, but at least the people who created it have seemed to sworn up and down that it was not video game inspired. So at this point, I take them at their word that it was just, I guess, coincidental, or just, how things happen where everything kind of develops in certain directions. I mean, I get what they were trying to do. I think was just really to speed up the experience. Like, I like the kind of things taking time, but I can see that from a certain standpoints that having to spend days and days and days to rest, as opposed to being able to take a single rest and kind of just recoup everything, that a lot of those things, I guess you might call convenience changes to help speed the game along, were probably welcome for a lot of people, though I find that the game can move too fast, and I like that slower pace, or I miss that slower pace when it's not there. But it's, different strokes for different folks. Let's see. Mass and Danger says, for these major issue is that picking your class was the last interesting mechanical decision you make. Pick a fighter, you're always going to be playing a tank. Yeah, I mean, yes. I don't even remember if they even did they have certain breakpoints where you could switch out to different things? But yeah, you were picking your role from the start, and you were going to stick with that role.
Fourth edition did multi-class, possibly the worst of all the settings.
Yeah, I think, you definitely were not very flexible. You kind of had to know from the start, okay, I want to play a tank. And I really dislike the terminology, but I guess if any edition of D&D you could really match that sort of MMO-ish terminology to, fourth edition is probably the closest because you did have people that couldn't necessarily, they didn't have that kind of aggro management that MMOs do. But I guess if anything came closest, it was the fourth edition. But it was funny because I would get into discussions with people where they're trying to give me all these tactics, and they're like, "Yeah, and I can kite this enemy around in circles." And I'm like, in D&D, I'm like, that enemy has no reason to run after you while the rest of the party's just standing there doing stuff. Like, that's not. Yes, that might work in World of Warcraft or whatever you're used to playing, but that's not how this game works. But it's all up to your GM. I guess if your GM lets you kite a creature around for days and days while everyone else just pelts it with arrows and spells or whatever, then hey, more power to you, I guess.
Yeah. Oh. Let me think. No, I've got like I said, there's other authors waiting to publish Mystara, but they're waiting for me to take the lead. I know Anne Dupuis, who did the Mystara Almanacs, is heavily waiting for that. And probably Havard and Thorfinn as well, who are some of the other big names in the Mystara 5e Renaissance.
Oh, so speaking of that, so where, if you're into Mystara or you want to get into Mystara and learn more, where is the place? Where's the virtual place to go for all things Mystara? Where would you point people to?
You go to the Falls of Pandius.
You want to throw that in the chat? Drop that link in there for everyone. Oh, and Mass and Danger want to know who's your map designer.
That is Thorfinn Tate. He actually had the maps designed before I started the book. He's this Finn, and he let me use the maps with permission on the grounds that I did not skew it a pixel, because the maps are perfect in every way, at least as far as the representation and the dimensions go. And map makers are a special breed.
I can imagine. Well, that's great that you had kind of maps ready to go and that were already there for you. And given it's very not a tough demand to get some free quality maps, that seems really good. I guess if we don't have anything else, we don't have to go to 12 just to go to 12. I mean, it's only 20 minutes away anyway. So does anybody have any? Said if you have questions, got any last bits, throw them into chat or forever, or at least until the next RPG Breakfast Club. Hold your peace. Oh, you got the typing going. So let's see what Mass and Danger has. Oh, we got two people typing. The tension is rising. What questions will come out of it? Now, it's funny. I think last time people were typing and they were just typing other stuff. They weren't questions, or they type and then stop. So we'll see if this time we get some good things to talk about.
All right. Shazam!
Iconic monster that's still in Mystara. That's probably the Black Ball. Even though it's not really a monster because you can't hurt it. It's just this 6 foot wide sphere that obliterates everything that it touches. In fact, years and years ago, they explained why there was not a Tarrasque in Mystara before the Tarrasque got its mythic status now. Except it's a sphere of annihilation that's much larger and quasi-sentient and will chase you.
Does it move, or is it sitting in some magician's
it moves.
lab somewhere? Okay.
It moves, and it zeroes in on the person with the highest intelligence, so it will chase.
Interesting. And where is it, and why hasn't it assimilated the entire world at this point?
Because it's only 6 feet in diameter, and if there's not somebody within a certain range with an intelligence, it just moves randomly.
Oh, okay. Is there it just begs to have some kind of random table that you roll to see where exactly the that thing is at any given, like at the beginning of a week or something, like where is this floating ball of death these days?
Yeah. Oh, it's a DM fiat all the way. If you want the party to move or to get out of the way, then you have it come through the wall.
Yeah, that'll definitely get a movie. Since if you really cannot damage it, then what about Wish? How does it interact with those kind of things? Is it just above and beyond all that stuff?
There are spells you can use to make it go somewhere else. And no, it's just 6 foot sections. It just moves through and leaves a hole. Let me find the art for it, because it's like going through this temple, just taking out whatever it touches, but only what it touches.
Okay, that's kind of where I got my thing. I was thinking I would just keep like just sucking everything like a singularity, but it has to literally move through things to kill it. Has no gravity, I guess. Is there some kind of story about what happens to stuff? Is it just obliterated, or is it the?
It's left blank on purpose.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. That's all that it is. It's just a giant. It's just a giant 8-ball.
but you can't shake it and ask it a question.
No, you don't. Yeah, it absorbs magic. It absorbs people. If you cast if you cast a gate, it automatically sucks it through the gate.
Oh, all right. But that's a pretty high level spell to have on hand to deal with it. So,
but it doesn't move that fast, so you can run away from it.
Has everybody heard of this? I mean, is it something that we see it like is something, or is it, do you have fun with it the first time it shows up and your players have no idea what this thing is, or is it pretty much known throughout the realm as this is the thing you run away from?
It's kind of a boogeyman. So the people in the more educated people will have heard of it.
Cool. Oh, so the grasshopper asked that he sees stars in there. Or they see stars in there? Are there stars, or is that just?
I think that's just artistic
license. Okay.
Plus, that's a very bad picture from the second edition monster book.
Gotcha. All right. So there's a question. Any other questions? Anything else you want to pitch, Glenn? Before, while Andrew might be typing questions. Anything else? You're talking a bunch about your Mystara stuff. Is there any links to anything? You have Patreons or anything else you want to?
Let me find the YouTube channel where I introduced the book, where I just showing off that it's actual real.
Cool. Well, while we're waiting for that link, any other questions, comments? So Andrew had a question. What's some general house rules / fixes, rebalances that you introduced for the classes? So Glenn, do you have any?
Not really, because the problem is the classes are kind of hardwired. I wish I had one for the Ranger, but you'd have to scrap the Ranger and restart, because it's just so. This was a problem. This always bugged me, is when they make a class, but they restrict the rules so much. So it's, instead of you playing what you want to play in that one, you're playing what the guy who designed it wants you to play. Like the reason why I always hated cross-class skills. So I'm starting to do a house rule with my players. Every time they would get a stat increase or a feat, they automatically gain one. They gain one skill, because that's one problem I have with 5th edition is once you've got your skill set in at 1st edition or 1st level, they're locked in. You never get any more except for in rare situations.
Yeah. Plus, I'm not super happy with the way the proficiency stuff works. We just get these like blob of increases at set intervals. It'd be kind of nice if you could fine tune it, or hey, just because my class gave me proficiency in all those, like that's just how it works. It might be nice to be able to fine tune and say I really want to be good at this, and I don't care if I'm not that great at this other thing. It just seems like you just get here's your set, and like you said, that's kind of it.
And that's so I was making a Frankenstein of all the different things. All the different editions of what I liked out of all of them, and the Rule Cyclopedia skill set was probably the best of those, where every so many levels you got a new skill because you're learning.
Yeah, I tend to do, when I'm running BX, I tend to just use roll under attribute for stuff, and I find that that's pretty. I like it a lot actually, because it lets your players feel, knowledgeable and everything. And I haven't found that I've really missed having discrete skills, though, and just as a design, I do like discrete skills, but I found that I haven't really missed them that much playing without them. And I just say, okay, if it seems reasonable, roll under your intelligence or roll under your wisdom or whatever, see if you can make it work.
Yeah. And there's a few things. I liked the minion rules from 4th edition.
Yeah, that's the one I think that surprises everybody didn't make it so terribly useful. And for some reason, I'm not a big skill challenges fan, but that's the other, I guess, feature from 4th edition that people just love and wish that 5th edition had. But definitely minions are great.
Well, if you want to fix Ranger, I mean, you look at the aspects, and Ranger is the fighting type skill monkey. You make him not as good as the fighter, but you have him make up for that with the skills. But the problem is the skill system isn't the greatest.
Yeah, I think the big, maybe the overarching issue is 5th edition balances all the classes in combat. So you find a lot of this where everything has to be the same. I totally think that as far as male or martial fighting, fighters should be the absolute best, and everybody else is not quite as good, but maybe they get a little extra feature that fighters don't have. Instead of worrying about everybody's got to kind of have the same overall damage output, maybe in different ways, but they all have to equalize. Like I'm not a big fan of that as a way of balancing things, but it seems to be kind of the road that they took.
And another issue that was discovered with, I think, Princes of the Apocalypse was, or was it not the Princes of the Apocalypse, the one that was Out of the Abyss, where a ranger that had the Underdark as his preferred domain just pretty much aced the module, no problem, because the automatic succeed on all skill checks when you're trying to survive. That was a little, that revealed problems that we didn't know existed.
Yeah, it's just such a big part of their feature set as it exists now. I always, it's hard to want to, you take that away. If you're not giving them any back, it's pretty harsh because that is one of their main features. And it's made it so that if you're honoring it, then you have a potential to break something out of the abyss, but then you really take it away from their capabilities.
And that was, what was it? Somebody pointed out, I got to agree with them, instead of making the battle master a fighter archetype, that should have been the fighter baseline. So you have all of the maneuvers and the fighting advantages, and then you apply those to the different types of fighters.
Oh yeah, I would totally agree. I didn't really think about that before, but yeah, it makes total sense. It really is like the core fighter features. The Mass and Dangerous Rangers have had that issue where they ignore the mechanics that they made to be bread and butter for. Yeah, I mean, it's hard. Rangers, I did a lot of videos on hex crawling and I talk about it. I tend to feel like for that kind of thing that my thing is, just let the Rangers be the Rangers, and then you have to just have other challenges or, make other things the focus of what the challenge is and not that part of it. It's when you're running a campaign like Out of the Abyss, where most of your campaign is supposed to be survival, then yeah, you've just kind of, you've made that, you've made it a nothing module. But I think that, other just a part of your greater campaign, then okay, so if you have a druid or a ranger, it's not going to be that horrible to be living in the wild. And to me, that's okay. But yeah, it's that thing where you have to know about it. So you know that, okay, I can't run an Out of the Abyss style adventure if I have a ranger, because essentially there's no challenge left there for them. But it's definitely a hard thing, right? It's kind of hard when you give any class that kind of ability. It's going to definitely make for some extremist things where it's like this class can ignore this particular challenge. And I think that's the same thing that people have with flying characters, that they ignore a whole other set of challenges. Though it seems like for flying characters, it's not quite so extreme because really they can only impact themselves. If you have difficult terrain, yeah, sure, the flying character can just fly over it, but the 4 other members of the party can't. So maybe that's not that bad. But I know there's that other issue of them going sharpshooter and hanging out 200 feet above the combat, just spraying people with longbow arrows. So there's other problems there. But yeah, that's when you give characters the ability to just totally ignore certain challenges, it does put pressures on the game in ways that can't always be balanced, depending on what's the campaign's about.
And I guess with the ranger, it's the fact that he can do it for the rest of the party.
Right. If it was just him, if he could gather like his own ration in the wild or do whatever, then yeah, that would be, because he makes it for the whole party. It really takes that kind of campaign and renders it null and void.
Yeah. If you wanted to do the ranger right, you have his combat abilities be based on surprise ambush tactics. So he's not as good as the fighter because he doesn't have using the battle master as the baseline. But if they're going to be setting up ambushes and stuff, then you gain access to some of the fighter abilities when you're using those tactics.
Yeah, the Grasshopper was saying that change it from, I guess, just all out, just overcoming any challenge that you have the DCs of certain challenges become easier, or that they can overcome them with effort at certain levels. So maybe you start off with if it's DC 8 at first level and then it's DC 10. I mean, that thing's good. I think the thing is that it runs into I can see why they make it all or nothing, because this is a problem you can't really avoid in role-playing games, is that, it's how GMs are going to interpret it, right? So that if you make it certain DCs, you do have that risk of DMs just deciding to be jerks and being like, oh, well, this is always going to be the DC higher than they can safely overcome, you know. Not to say that it's a bad thing. You just, because obviously everything at a certain level depends on DMs not being jerks and setting things at crazy levels just for their own jollies. But, you know, that is a risk of such things that they never run into the DC that they can safely handle, which can be a problem sometimes with those kind of things. But yeah, I think it's definitely a workable solution. And they, you know, I don't even know if it's just in the DM's guide, but maybe the player's handbook has that kind of little table of difficulty challenges and where they should be for different things.
Yeah. And they can also get rid of the ranger spells, or at least make that a spellcasting ranger as a subtype.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that there's a lot they could do. It seems like they don't feel the need to do it. I do think that one of the things that maybe gets overlooked sometimes is that for the vast amount of people playing the game out in the wild who aren't on Reddit, following all the feeds, who aren't watching all the content, who aren't taking part in all the stuff, that the PHB Ranger may be not as good an option as other classes, and that may be broken in some ways, but it is playable for those people. And I think that's why Wizards looking at it going, you know what? From all the people who are just playing with their friends and having a good time, they're not seeing the brokenness of the Ranger that people are seeing who are more interested in all the nitty gritty. And so there's not that pressure real pressure to fix it. I mean, obviously they keep going to the well and throwing options out on like, Unearthed Arcana and kind of stuff, but that it's not so broken to the world at large that they feel the need to fix it, for better or worse. All right.
Just put me in charge. I'll fix everything.
There you go. There you have it. Glenn for president of D&D. Didn't they have that? I think like Critical Role or something. They were running some kind of campaign and it was, president of D&D. I don't remember. I don't watch Critical Role that much, but I think I remember seeing something about that. Oh, president of D&D Beyond. Okay. I have not used D&D Beyond. I hear it seems like a good, cool tool. Did they take care of that? Do you, if Mystara came out, do they sub that out to people if you have your own content? Get on D&D Beyond, or is that just for first party stuff? I guess, right? There's no guild things on D&D Beyond.
I don't know. I don't play online.
Would you? Oh, he says Master Danger says there is. Would you do stuff or Fantasy Grounds or D&D Beyond sub that stuff out?
There's people that said if this goes live, they will be more than happy to put it on to convert it to Fantasy Ground and such for me.
Nice. I don't actually play online through those things either, but I know it's a big powerful tool. I'm kind of wondering if those tools will get to a spot where some of the more crunchy games that I think were hard to run or just laborious to run pen and paper style would come back, because you could do something like all that oxygen consumption on Spelljammer. It's just a click of a button in something like Roll20, and then it makes like, why not have, if you're playing on Roll20 and it's handling everything, like why not try weapon speeds and some of that stuff out, that if you're running a gritty campaign can be interesting and make for some interesting choices and options. But now you can run it and it doesn't impact the playing speed, because Roll20 is going to handle that with your initiative and everything, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. So why not throw those options back in the mix?
Yeah. So that's when they start coming out, I'm pretty sure that when the book hits, there's going to be tons of people putting it on for the electronic stuff.
Cool. All right. So final call, Master Danger. You got a question or just more about it? So Master Danger, you said on D&D Beyond there is, and there's homebrew stuff. Great. I haven't really, like I said, checked out D&D Beyond, but I hear good things about it. So it's nice to know that you can get stuff off there too. He also says he likes, new dynamic lighting stuff. Makes dungeon crawls cool. Yeah, I've seen some of the images and some videos of people on Roll20. It does seem really cool. People have crazy setups right now. I've seen that where they've got basically giant flat screen TVs embedded in their tables so that they have it. They're putting minis on top of the dynamic images of dungeons with animations and dynamic lighting and all stuff. People are doing amazing stuff with their setups. I wish I knew somebody had that kind of thing set up. But most of that stuff, I feel like, I don't know, in the city, everyone's got, at least everyone I know, we're all living in tiny apartments. We don't have room for dedicated gaming setups like that. It's a dream, but some pretty crazy stuff. But all right, I guess it is noon, so we will wrap things up. Glenn, thanks so much for joining me. It was just a two-man show, and you had to do the lion's share of the chatting. So I appreciate you taking the time out to talk about Mystara and your project and all that good stuff.
Okay, not a problem.
But yeah, everybody have a great rest of your Sunday. Thanks for joining, and we'll talk to you later next week, hopefully.